next guest has a very specific skill. She knows what people desire and why do they desire these things and how. And what is the impact of design on desire. And in technical terms, this is really cool, it's wonderfully cool. Just think about it. If a company knows about it, then they know how to design a product and how to set it up. Very interesting. She's a professor with a lot of experience. I don't know if it's her first time in Italy or not, but Beth Altringer.
I'll leave you the stage and I'll see you later for the Q&A.
Wonderful. I have to say that this is, I didn't even really know that this was a dream until today, but to be on the runway with a bunch of big brains is a pretty exciting moment in my life. So I focus on why some products and services are more desirable than others. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I think about this, about the framework that I use, and share some example projects with you. So this is the desirability framework that I use. So I look at multisensory balance. So if you think back to the cup of coffee that you had this morning, you have smells happening, you have tastes happening, you have the feel of the mug, you have temperature, you have the environment around you, you have the conversation. You have this rich multisensory experience, and you have this sense of whether that was a desirable coffee experience or not. People are not ambiguous about that. And I look at where that balance actually is. And then I also look at emotional design. So you have these cognitive and identity associations with coffee. It's associated with wakefulness, first thing in the morning, sort of time of day, et cetera. Both of those might be really positive. So you've had this nice multisensory experience, a nice emotional experience with your coffee. And then the third one is about expectation and reality fit, right? If your coffee is chunky, you probably didn't expect chunky coffee. And that sort of destroys the desirability of this experience. So why is desirability especially important today? Why is there this urgency about it? And the way that I think about this is because there's an increasingly open conversation between consumers and creators. And I'm going to share an example. I don't know how many people here know of the brand JCrew. Does anybody know of this brand? So JCrew is a very popular fashion retailer in the United States. In 2008, an anonymous blogger named Alexis, who's in her 30s and apparently in academia and is not me, for the record, 95% of Alexis's wardrobe is JCrew. She starts this site. This site basically becomes a crowdsourced, in real life review site of JCrew outfits. She has no sponsors, no links, no advertisements on the page. She's not even trying to make money off of this. JCrew's response to Alexis is basically no official relationship because they can't really control Alexis in any way. This site gets about 25,000 hits a day. And in 2014, JCrew releases their own review system. But that's not the end of the story. It goes even further. A fan, yeah, there's me, I'm a fan. So a fan actually requests a specific swimsuit to be brought back into production, and that, I want to show the swimsuit. Here we go, yeah. So this swimsuit was out of production. A fan requests that it comes back. This is in 2014. Jenna Lyons, the creative director of JCrew, not only responds by bringing the swimsuit back, but by turning it into an advertisement. So she says to this person who requested it, "Dear Miss Avens, your wish is my command within reason. XO, Jenna Lyons." That's pretty powerful. So back to this framework of desirability. One of the most, I've studied a lot of things at this stage. Probably the most powerful experience that I had in terms of understanding desirability was studying to become a competitive blind wine taster. And what you learn to do is study the visual characteristics of wine, the olfactory characteristics, and the chemical characteristics on the palate. And what you're doing is filling out a multisensory logic puzzle. And what's so interesting is you have to be able to say, what is the wine varietal, the country, region, sub-region, and the year for each of these different wines. And you can do this, and it's extraordinary, and it really kind of blew my mind, because if you can deconstruct the experience of a glass of wine, you can deconstruct other designed experiences. So when we look at multisensory design that delights us, this wine tasting experience, I've kind of in my career so far explored in a lot of different ways, taking that further. And one was last summer in Umbria, I stayed at this farm. And what I really wanted to do was figure out how can we recreate the experience of being in a place for people who are not in that place. And so what I tried to do is tell the story of being in this place, on this farm, in 3 different ways. And really it's the intersection of those 3 different stories that is maybe the way that we can begin to communicate the experience of being in a place to someone who's not there. So one, I individually photographed all of these different things, the people, the cars, the tomato plants, everything that's grown, that's eaten there. And then I also attached cameras to the people who live and work there and compiled a video of a day in the life of this place. I also created a website where you can click into any of these and see the story of the component, right? The component that makes up the whole. And through these 3 stories, you can kind of get a sense of being there without necessarily going there. This was an artistic exploration, but a really interesting one. And what's particularly interesting to me about this area is that technology at the same time is increasing and allowing us to do a lot more with data analysis. So from that exploration, I've now been creating software to enhance flavor discovery. So if we can break down the component parts of wines, of foods, of other beverages, we can also begin to imagine more creative ways to put them back together and still create a delightful experience. So this software is not yet available, but what I'm using it for is collaborations with people who are already at the top of their game creatively. And one of those was called Taste Emoji, and this was earlier this summer with one of the top restaurants in Cambridge. And this dinner was really unusual. So it's an 8-course dinner, a pairing dinner, and the only thing that is on the menu each course is a rich emotional context. So a slap in the face was one of the courses. And what I did is I used this software to translate what does a slap in the face mean emotionally from a multisensory standpoint, from an expectation reality standpoint, and how does that translate into wine? How can I create the criteria to select a wine that is as similar as possible to a slap in the face? Then how can I turn that into criteria for the culinary team at Study to push them creatively? So what they put together was mackerel, it's a type of fish, and a garlic ice cream and some other different things. So they were really able to think even further out there than they might have otherwise. And the dessert dish for this, the final pairing, was Studio 54 in its prime. And we served weed and honey, that's marijuana in a form of a space cake, and honey. And it was extraordinary, and people in Boston were into it. All right, so expectation reality design that can help motivate us. So the example I'm going to give for this is a class that I created. So a lot of my students would love to be Mark Zuckerberg. It's a very popular aspiration at Harvard. And so I studied a little bit, how well are we preparing them for this expectation that they might have in the world? What's interesting is their expectation in terms of the classroom is for a pretty traditional class. That's for studying with peers who are studying the same thing, working on problems that have known answers, being evaluated individually, and rarely being given the responsibility for deciding what next they should do in the classroom. But the reality for becoming someone like Mark Zuckerberg is that you need to work on multidisciplinary teams, work on open-ended problems that don't necessarily have an answer, to practice, to get this practice deciding what next in an environment of uncertainty and defending those decisions. And we give students remarkably little practice in those areas. So I created a course called Design Survivor, and it's kind of like the reality show Survivor, but a little less mean. And we focus on design. And so in about 12 weeks, students do 10 different projects. Each of those projects has a psychological concept at its foundation, because that's my field. So one of those might be interpersonal status display, for example. Or how do you create something that is calming for people? We have 10 different case studies, and so one of the other weeks is we study behavioral change. And so we bring Fitbit in, and they talk about how they've been really successful in this area. There are 10 different design skills. So one week we're doing 3D modeling. Another week we're creating electronic music. Another week we're creating furniture. Another week we're creating a behavioral change strategy. They have 10 different partners. Each of these is a collaborative challenge. They get 10 rounds of feedback, both on the idea and on the partnership. They develop a collection of what they're finding interesting in the world, as well as what they're creating in the world. And because my background is in advanced analytics for this type of work, they benefit from all of that. So I'm able to analyze what they find interesting and what they're creating, and tell them what some of the patterns in those things are that can help them make some career decisions in the future. So we talked about multidisciplinary design, multisensory design, and then we talked about expectation, reality, fit. The last one is emotional design. And so I'm going to share with you one of the challenges from the students this last year. So can we create music and headphones that actually make us feel better? If you look at these headphones, they're actually gritty, they're 3D printed, they're functional, and you can create them in a week. So what we did is this particular challenge built on a bunch of the other challenges in the class. So the students needed to identify a context that puts them in a negative mood. They needed to design a behavioral change strategy involving music to improve that mood. So we analyzed Pharrell's Happy. Do you know this song? It's a very well-known song. And it elicits happiness. It actually makes you feel happy, right? So we studied all of these things that you can see up here to figure out, why does happy actually make you feel happy? And the students needed to learn SolidWorks, which is 3D modeling software, Ableton Live, music software, and design a song based on those analytics. Then they designed headphones based on this concept of interpersonal status display, so they had to be covetable. And then they had to assemble, produce, test, and demo these a week later. So what I want to end on is actually a provocation for all of you. So what is the desirable design conversation that you're having with the world? And when I work with my students to think about this, we focus in two areas. So one is, what are you noticing in the world that you find desirable, and how are you recording this so that you can analyze it later? And what are you creating in the world? What are you producing that's desirable? And back to that example of JCrew, what feedback channels are you opening up for information to come back to you? And then finally, how are you reflecting on this to improve yourself and to improve the types of things that you're creating in society? Thank you.
I'll switch in Italian for a second. In pratica, secondo me uno dei concetti
Well, in
fondamentali
practice,
di
one of the
Beth è che puoi
main concepts in Beth's speech is that you can reconstruct the experience. You start from the back, you understand the user's experience, and from that you understand what is the path that is followed to make a product desirable or less. And then she carries out all those wonderful experiences. If I had her as a professor, my life would have been totally different.
My life would have been completely different. I mean, and how do your students react? I mean, when you say, okay, guys, let's design headphones that make you feel happy. I mean, that's crazy.
So I put a lot of work into designing the challenges. I do them all myself first, and one of the criteria for designing them is that it sounds impossible when I announce it.
Okay.
And then a week later, the students have succeeded in doing this. And the reason I do that is it's confidence inspiring, not because I can do it or because I've invited famous guests who can do it, but because you didn't think it was possible last week and you just did it.
Got it.
Yeah.
Let's get a few questions.
Sure.
And I'm also curious, while we get the slide on the screen, follow me that so I want this audience see you that they are. You still with me, guys? Let me hear your passion.
Woo!
Whoa, that was good. Really amazing passion. Okay, so by the way, that experiment in the restaurant with the slapping face, I mean, you really went there and someone slapped you in the face while you eating, or it was
No.
just...
No,
Okay.
it's can we translate that into food and beverage?
Okay.
And I did serve a little Band-Aid on the side of the plate,
Okay.
in just in case.
Cool, very interesting. So, what does it mean to you to explore and train your taste and desire? Why so important creatively and entrepreneurially? Wow, okay.
Great. So, for my own journey, this has been really important. But one of the things I've found really interesting in the types of analytics that I do. So, at this stage, I don't know, I have hundreds of students a year, and I analyze what they're noticing in the world and what they're creating in the world to give them better feedback. And one of the things that I found most profound about that is that they're related. It's like we're all having this conversation with the world to figure ourselves out, and that manifest in what we notice, what we find desirable, and what we try to create for the world, especially when we're given the freedom to create what we think would be best. And I think what's so interesting about that is that dialogue is different for all of us, and we want that sort of diversity, but the challenge is then figuring out what conversation you want to have with the world.
Right. What do you think are few examples of products or service that are designed in a way that people just, they want it, that's it. I was thinking, iPhone, of course, people feel like it's sexy to have it. Or is any case study that you think, wow, this is really super cool?
There's so many. I could have this conversation all day. But one of my favorite products is Sonos. It's it's perfectly plug and play. It's with your phone and with your entire sound system in your house, and you can create a system that used to cost so much money, and now it's simple. And it says that it's a 5-minute setup, and it truly is a 5-minute setup.
Yeah. By the way, I'm a Sonos
I
user,
love Sonos. Yeah.
All right, next question is in Italian. I'll translate it for you.
Sure.
Poi mi dite chi ha fatto queste domande, ve lo voglio vedere, fuori lo voglio vedere. Allora, to understand if design will have an impact on desire, will the experiential marketing use often?
Okay, I think I understand what you mean.
Yeah, it was my translation, if you didn't understand.
Yeah, I think I use slightly different terminology, but I think what we're able to do with data is really interesting. So not only do you have like the Alexis example that I gave, where technology is allowing people to just share more through different platforms with us, but also we're able to track behavior in a way that wasn't possible in the past, and that opens up new opportunities for analytics. So absolutely, experiential and like a two-way dialogue is changing the way that we think about design. It's opening up the domain of design to not just the creator as we've seen it in the past, but the shared experience of creation.
How do you choose your research? I mean, one day you get up and say, well, I could do a research on this. Why? What are the variables that you choose to start a research on a topic?
Sure. So it helps that I'm interested in pretty much everything.
Okay.
But I feel really grateful to have the job that I have. I get a lot of freedom in what I decide to research, and I focus on the things that I find most interesting. And I'm fascinated by this concept of multisensory balance, and you can see it happening kind of over and over again in different areas of what I've done. And I think that's important, and when I talk to my students about, they're all obsessed with this question of what they want to do with their lives. And if you have the luxury to focus on what you find interesting, the reality is that the road's going to be really difficult, and you need that extra motivation to get over all of those hurdles. And I think that, I've been really lucky to have that experience, and I think the degree to which that's possible for those of you who are students in the audience, try to create that. Try to really push yourselves along the dimensions of the questions that are most interesting to you, because you actually kind of can forge your own path that way.
I love it. I will translate it in Italian just to be sure that everyone understands if they're a student. Beth dice un concetto bellissimo, secondo me, che per capire cosa vuoi fare
Beth
da
says
grande,
something wonderful.
cosa vuoi
In
fare
order
nella
to understand
vita,
what you want to do in your life,
quelle domande
you
che
need
per
to
te sono
focus
interessanti,
on those questions that
dove
are
parte
most
proprio il tuo
interesting to you,
desiderio, perché sai che a quel
where your
punto
desire, that
sei
trigger your
indirizzato
desire,
nella
because
giusta.
this is the only way to know you're heading the
What's
right
the
way.
balance we have to find between desires and needs for future products in the mobility field? Okay.
Yeah, so this is really interesting. There are kind of two parts of this question I think that are really interesting. One is that we're differentiating between desires and needs. And I think that sometimes the term desirability is seen as a sort of luxury, an add-on that we might have. But I think that our needs are part of what is desirable, right? We have to meet that first. But it's hard to be competitive and only focus on needs these days, because that tends to be a commodified space. And so the extra levels of desirability become even more important right now. So specific to mobility, I think it's such an exciting time to be working in mobility, because some of the fundamental premises of the way people move are changing, and changing in different ways in a lot of different countries. And so in terms of finding this balance, there's definitely a research initiative for figuring out what is changing and how is this changing the way people move in a really fundamental way, and removing ourselves from the assumptions that transportation needs to be car-based or any of the other assumptions that we've been making. And I think it's a really exciting time to reimagine what mobility can mean in the future.
Right. I read this book. I think it's called Thinking Fast and Slow.
Possible? I love that book.
Yeah.
Daniel
Did you
Kahneman.
write it? Or
I did not. No, that's Daniel
here
Kahneman. He's a hero. Yep.
It's a good book. And there is one moment when he's talking about priming. So basically, he say, okay, if you go in a restaurant and the song is, I don't know, a French song, you maybe are a little bit pushed to order a French wine or something like that. Is this priming really so strong to start the desire in your research?
That's a fascinating question. So there's a sense that priming is a real thing, but this is what's so exciting to me about where we are right now. So that's one factor, but it happens in context, right? You have many other factors at work, and we're developing the analytical capacity to look at priming in the context of all of the other factors. So priming may not be the most important factor. You might be at that restaurant, you hear the French music, you have your list of wines, but your partner prefers a different wine. Well, that's probably going to influence your decision more than the fact that the music was on.
Okay.
So we're able to look at all of those factors and tabulate them within context, and also account for the subjectivity of these types of problems.
Got it. So the context is the most important thing.
It's essential, yeah.
Very good. Beth Altringer, a big round of applause, guys.
You.
Thank you so much, Beth. I'll let you go down there.